Fort Jesus Warriors Club. Topic: must we cheat to win followers? The arms race was on and space race was on too at the same time. People from the Soviet Socialist Republic, United Soviet Socialist Republic, were the first ones to put a spacecraft in space going around the Earth. It was called Sputnik. Again, as the Americans were trying to move the rockets around the Earth, the Russians did something extraordinary. They put a dog in the spaceship that went around the Earth in space, and for the very first time to the human beings, a living thing went to space and survived coming back to Earth. This was a dog, a Russian dog called Laika. It was put in a rocket. It went, completed several laps around the Earth, and landed. People realized that a living thing can go into space and come back alive if conditions are okay. Then Russia went ahead. The USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republics, went ahead and were able to land the first unmanned rocket on the moon. Then John F. Kennedy, the president of America at that time, told the people the Americans, whatever happens, they must win the race to the moon. So before Russia could take people to the moon, America was able to land the first man on the moon. So the United Soviet Socialist Republics had beaten them in everything, but they beat them in putting the first man on the moon. It was a great feat. Those who understood what was happening, my dad told me and the others, they were glued on the TV, seeing somebody moving on the moon, seeing hills and valleys on the moon, just like on Earth. It was something that people talked about. But that was also the time that the spreading of the Christian religion was on the peak, because that was the time of the Cold War, and there was that fear that the world could be blown to pieces any moment. Russia had lots of weapons that would finish America, and America had a lot of weapons that could finish Russia, and there was the NATO states that had weapons that would be, and they were the other sides. And now looked like the world was coming to an end. It was the time of the Cold War. It was a bad time. Khrushchev, the Russian, United Soviet Socialist, was not Russian, had ships going, taking nuclear weapons to Cuba. And the world came to a standstill. The Americans were threatening to attack the Russian ships. The Russians put the nuclear weapons on the ready. The Americans put the nuclear weapons on the ready and started announcing emergency procedures. Russia also started announcing emergency procedures. If you hear this, this is what you do. If there is a shelter, if you have a room underground, a cellar, when you hear this announcement, because in case of an attack, our radios may not be able to communicate. If you have a sailor, make sure you have got a torch, you've got some water, some food that can last you several days. Because in case of an attack, we shall lose communication. And everybody was set. And the Russian ships were approaching Cuba. And America was saying no, they won't reach. American warships were shadowing Russia's ships. And Russians were forging on ahead. And America was saying Cuba is too close. We shall destroy the ships that are coming, and we shall destroy the whole of Cuba. Cuba will sink. And the Russians were saying Cuba sinks and America sinks. And then America was saying, if America sinks, Russia sinks. And NATO was ready. And everybody was ready. And that last day that people were anticipating had come nearby. It was only when the American president, after that, called the USSR president on the red phone, and they talked, and the things escalated. Everybody had prepared for the end of the world. This was the time when the preaching of the end of the world was at its peak. And America preachers were at where Africa is now. It was a time of miracles, a time of going to heaven. The world is ending. Russia can finish us 4 times. We can finish Russia, I don't know how many times. And during this time, the world will be annihilated. It will be thrown, the earth will be thrown out of the orbit, either into the sun or into space, or it will be blown into smithereens, small pieces that cannot be able to hold anything. So everybody was ready for the end. And this was a time when people started cashing in. That was the time there was no mobile phone. They called them intercoms or what? Some things that could be able to communicate to somebody just like the mobile phone. That was when it was on the onset. This is when preachers who were empowered would pray. This was when, what do they call them? There is a word they call them, shamans. Shamans, or the witches and the wizards who had powers, would heal. So it was a shaman type. It was also a preacher's time. And this was a time when pretenders also got into the mood to make money. The world is coming to an end. So everybody, bring everything, keep thy treasures in heaven where no moth. Nowadays I don't hear that much. It was there at that time. That is where we are going through now. And people are dishing money left, right, center, so that they prepare, they keep their treasures in the churches, in the men of God, where no moths can touch. So when they die, they will get their money in heaven. And as this was going on, true preachers were outlined, those who would preach, and God would give miracles. Miracles are there. I'm not saying there are no miracles. That one you have to get. But there are very few miracles. And many of the things that we have is what was happening in America. America preachers, the fiery Pentecostal and others now started. They would have intercom. And then when you come, because you need to be prayed to, those who need prayers pass by the ushers. So if it is Kariangofo going by the teachers, the ushers, not the teachers, the ushers, then the usher would ask you, you are Kariangofo, yes. What is your problem? You say, my problem is I'm a Kariako. I feel like a donkey. I'm carrying. And then quietly, they talk through the intercom. One of the people who needs to be prayed for is called Kariangofo. He's got a problem. He feels like he's a Kariako. And he feels like he's a donkey. And when you are there in the midst of people waiting, the preacher says, I've seen a vision. I've been given a name. Kariangofo. Kariangofo. Anybody can And then everybody surprised. We are also surprised. Skadiankofo, I'm being shown that sometimes you feel like a donkey, like a horse, I don't know. And it comes like that, and you're finished, and so that thing went on. And those who were acting miracles acted, and money was flowing, and people wanted to keep their treasures where the moth cannot get. As that one was going on, some famous TV stations in America, they are still so famous now, also got into the bandwagon. There was preaching, excess preaching, and also some acting of preaching in the process. There were real miracles, and they were fake miracles, and they were acted miracles, and every preacher was a miracle man. Then others went to preaching prosperity. Bring thy money so that everything grows up quickly, and then by the time that time of going to heaven will come, you will have enjoyed. So we started having prosperity preaching and all those things. Just the way they are happening in Africa now, they happened in America during that time. People are cheated, and they believed it was praying to God. But the worst that happened was during that time of the arms race. Scientific discoveries were still going on. Americans wanted to dig and see if they could be able to get to the core of the earth, get the magma, see what the earth is made of, because that's how just theories, the way we see volcanoes erupting. People assume that is the way things are. It proved to be very difficult because as they went deeper, the rocks got hotter, the drilling equipment could not manage much, it started bending, just like cooked spaghetti. Now it was not like metal. So you try to put it at an angle, it's difficult, you put the diamond bits, sometimes the rigs go. So America dug that time, it was the longest. I don't know if it went several miles, but they could not go any further, they abandoned everything. But Russia also wanted to outdo them. They wanted to get to the magma. And they dug. The thing went on over 10 years. Digging day and night, relaxing, because once it reached a certain length, the rock started behaving differently. The rocks would behave like molten plastic. It would behave differently, like so differently that the scientists had expected. Sometimes you drill and it fills back whatever you are drilling. So the temperatures rose. They were double what they expected. For almost 10 years, I think for 10 years, the Russians were drilling and they had not gone halfway. And it reached a time when the United Soviet Socialist Republic, it reached a time when the republic broke during the time of Gorbachev, and the drilling was still going on. And they had not hit anywhere. So the funding went down and they had to give up the drilling. They closed up everything, sealed the hole. But somebody had leaked to the Americans that the Russians were drilling. And when they stopped, they drilled, it was the deepest ever, but it had not gone halfway to where it was supposed to get because of the problems with the rocks and the heat and everything. So what happened? A message leaked to one of the big TV stations, Christian TV stations. You know it. I don't know, I don't have to mention. And one of the greatest anchors at that time, Christian, those who would pray for miracles, and there are teams of prayers and everybody. And when it came, a great idea struck. This was a time to make people believe in God by telling them something that will scare them. And so they came up with a drilling story. There was a horror movie that was acted. They got the scripts that was carrying the part of it with screaming and everything and whatever, modified it so that it sounded so terrible, and then concocted a story that the Russians dug and they reached an empty cavern somewhere under there, and the Russians had a fireproof microphone and they dropped, and this is what they had, and there were screams in the horror movies. This is what they had. There is hell down there. These are people burning in hell. This is a reality. The Russians have dug. They have struck hell. What we are told in this book, people will screaming, rushing that this is it here, and everybody panicked. And they were in a frenzy. They wanted to keep their money where the moths cannot reach, and everything. Everybody was rushing to the churches and doing everything. Until when it reached the Russians, it was the time of propaganda and whatever. And the scientists who sealed the hole were surprised. They never hit anything. Everything ran out of funding. It was difficult to maneuver the metals and everything there, and they have closed shop. And here now is a story of them having drilled and reached hell. And there is something and a tapping of screams that the purported microphone has picked from hell. It went on for a long time, and the Russian drillers had to come out openly and say, we never did that, we never reached that one. There was no funding. We reached this, there were challenges. It's only a new drilling bit that can go deeper, deal with the rocks in the ground that they came up with. People even use that type of drilling to get to oil and water. But they did not get even halfway towards the magma. So I looked at this story and what has been happening. We had the Rediondo thing. We've had people who have been forced to commit suicide by fasting. This guy, he's an MP now. I'm sorry for saying this guy. The Honorable MP who was doing Jichopevu one time brought us a preacher who would coach people, do things over the radio. You saw it, I don't know the name, but you can consult that. And such a things went on. Some are still going on. It's interesting that sometimes some of our famous preachers, in quotes, I'm not saying miracles are there, not there. I've seen miracles too. Even my survival now is a miracle. I always tell you that. If it were not for Jesus, if it were not for God, I would not be talking to you. But I'm also talking about the treacherous things we do to unsuspecting members. You've had a case of people being healed, and a person is prayed for, he was blind and his eyes open. You've had that. But now that is a first miracle. Now the person who the miracle has happened to starts performing other miracles. He had never seen all his life. His eyes open. Can you see? Yes. What can you see? A person. What color is that person? Red. Then which one? Yellow. What can you see? I can see people. What can you see down there? I can see bicycle. Surely, this is your very first time to see. You are able to identify colors, able to identify bicycles, able to identify. Surely. Please give us a break. If God has given you the gift, please pray for people. Let them get healed. Let's not play drama with the word of God. That's why I talk of faith. Because faith is undisputed. Not all faith people should have healing powers. God has done miracles to me. I have an autistic child. He still remains autistic. And if God has not given me that ability to do that, I cannot pretend. I move with him in town. Today somebody asked me about the healing of that on a t-shirt. And I laughed. I said yes. There was also a musician, the one who sang Kuna Dawa, had an autistic child. And one time she went to a supermarket. That was the story she was telling. And somebody was asking her in the supermarket, now you are singing to people there is medicine. Why don't you heal your own son? It's not everybody who is given that. You're given different things, and God works different ways. And we don't have to pretend. You can't. You can. Don't dramatize. So I was saying, please, we don't have to cheat to uplift the word of God. Just be ourselves, say what you know about God. That will work. Rather than taking people through this thing, like the health thing, to get money, to get fame, to put people in fear, whereas it is a lie. What impression does it give the world about the people who believe in God? I'm calling upon all believers, those who have faith, just be yourselves. Be yourselves. That is my take for now.